Joining us on Talking Sense today, John Steenhuisen, leader of the DA and Minister of Agriculture. Hello, John. Great to have you on.
Hey, Gabriel, great to be with you. And I'm very, very glad to be making my first debut on the Common Sense. I've really been watching a lot of the content and obviously reading the incredible Daily Mailer. Really excellent work. And it's so great to see the huge contribution and reach you guys are having already. So it really is a distinct honor to be on today.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's our pleasure to have you on today. So, John, usually I start with an introduction, but I think that you're quite a well-known public figure at this point. So we're going to skip over that and get
You know, they
straight
say
into the meat.
famous or infamous.
Yes. Well, famous around these parts, but we're going to go straight into the meat of the discussion. And I want to take you back with my first question to the week after the 29th of May, 2024, because that was, a completely historic moment in South Africa's democratic history, the first time that the ANC falls below a majority, and all of a sudden they are forced to put together a new coalition to garner a majority so that we have a government that can govern South Africa. So can you just tell us what it was like, immediately after, and then what it was like negotiating the GNU and trying to get this thing off the ground?
Yeah, sure. So I think there was a bit of a calm before the storm in the immediate days after the election while people were watching those big boards at the IEC and the numbers ticking over. But we were pretty confident going into the election that the ANC was going to lose its majority. We didn't obviously expect them to end up at 39% where they did. We had them pegged in the mid 40s. And that was one of the reasons why the April before that election, I'd announced at the DA's Congress that we needed to prepare ourselves for the Moonshot Pact, but that should the Moonshot Pact not be able to get us over the line, to look at what permutations are there to put South Africa first. So there was a bit of a calm in the days afterwards, and then I sent a message to President Ramaphosa via WhatsApp saying, I think it's time for the adults to have a conversation. And obviously phoned my counterparts in the IFP and the Freedom Front Plus to indicate to them that we were looking at having talks about talks, and to alert them to the fact that that was the path we were going down, and obviously to seek some guidance from them. And thereafter, the messages started to come back. We need to start having talks, etc. I then had to put a team together to negotiate and go into the talks. And I think that matter is now a subject of history, who was on that team. And the reason I selected them at the time was experience, understanding of politics, and people who've been in coalitions before, and as well as those who were in Parliament already to understand the current political environment at a parliamentary level. So, yeah, it was a bit of a lull straight after the election, but no time. Generally we book holidays a few days after the election and go off and recover. This campaign continued for another 2 to 3 months there afterwards, and it was very grueling to come off such a hard election campaign trail and then have to plunge straight into the coalition negotiations. But certainly historic and great to have been at the very epicenter of those goings on.
Yeah, and can you just talk to us a little bit about what it was like dealing with the ANC and trying to negotiate a kind of new compact to govern South Africa to put together a majority? Because I can imagine that when you arrive to that first negotiation, you're sitting and against a bunch of counterparts who have never had something like this happen before. You might be in a kind of state of shock, and you are now trying to actually figure out, okay, well, we need to, in order to have a coalition, we need to divide power. Let's figure out the way that we do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there was a bit of a initial shell shock. I mean, I don't think the ANC had ever found themselves in a position like this before, whereas we had in Cape Town, in the Western Cape, and a few other places. But I mean, they've really had a complete command of the political sphere since 1994. And this was obviously new territory for them. And I think there was still a sense of disbelief among some quarters, but amongst others, the realism that this has happened now, and their party had to make a choice whether it goes down the road of working together with the doomsday partners in the MK and EFF, or whether they put South Africa first and made the obvious right decision for the economy and for South Africa. And I don't think many people know, but this was a very live discussion in the ANC. There were two very strong schools of thought on either side, just as there were two strong schools of thought, in fact, three strong schools of thought within the DA about how we should proceed. I was always of the view going into the election, as well as looking at the way the chips had fallen after the election, that a full scale coalition was the best way for us to proceed and best way for the DA to extract advantages and opportunities from being in government. And I think that many of those have come to fruition. Of course, there are downsides to every decision, and there have been a few of those. But I think on the whole, I think that the DA has emerged stronger, certainly amongst voting segments that have not voted for the party before, as a result of our full-blooded participation, that I don't think we would have got in a coalition of supply, or whether we had sat on our hands and watched the doomsday being formed.
Yeah, just from my perspective as a pollster, given that that's what I was, it solely was before joining the Common Sense, the one kind of political idea in South Africa that managed to generate any sort of positive sentiment was this idea of parties coming together to work together, putting aside their differences to forward the interests of South Africa. And so, it wasn't just that the GNU was a historic moment that you can kind of come together, but it also has, it seems to have brought back in this kind of a new life into some optimism in politics, because, prior to 2024, you were hard pressed to find any sort of, government achievement that, or lack thereof, that generated any positive sentiment.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's definitely the case. And I still think there is that represented in much of the polling, and including some of the advances. But what it was also very good for, which you as a pollster would also have picked up, no doubt, in the weeks and months following the formation of the GNU, is that it shifted the perception of the DA amongst key voter markets for us. So obviously our supporters were relieved that we had prevented the doomsday from happening. But our opponents had, for the last 25 years, used three very damaging electoral mantras against us in elections. What were those? One, if the DA gets into government, it'll cancel your social grants. Now, as ridiculous as this sounds, a very powerful totem in rural areas where large numbers of people rely solely on those grants to put food on the table and source source survival for their families. The second totemic weapon that was used was that the DA would govern for white people only, and that they would then benefit. And thirdly, that the DA would bring back apartheid. Now, as ridiculous as these three totems stand, they were formidable weapons in the hands of our opponents. By joining the GNU, we've been able to slay all three of those Gorgon monsters and have shifted perception. One, we're in government. We haven't cancelled social grants. In fact, our work on the budget has made very clear and very sure that the financial stability is required that would see our social network continuing being able to, and safety net continuing to be able to be funded in a responsible way. Secondly, we're governing in a way that helps all South Africans, but I would say by largely the biggest beneficiaries outside of obviously the growth in business sentiment and investment sentiment has been poor black South Africans who don't need to queue now for days outside a Home Affairs office, who will soon be able to access good internet, whose government schools are focusing on the basics. And thirdly, apartheid isn't back. In fact, I would say we've entrenched democracy and the rule of law far more than anything. So what it has allowed is a rebranding of the DA without changing the logo or changing the leader or the other cosmetic attempts that were made in the past. It's a genuine perception now from people who hadn't voted for us before that actually these guys are serious about delivery, and I like what they're doing. in those portfolios, and we're seeing progress. And that, I think, is going to be very important for the DA, particularly going into the 2026 local government elections.
Yeah, but before the 2026 local government elections, there is another very important election, and that is the DA's internal leadership election. And now there has been a lot of reporting on you specifically, and a lot of knives have come out from a lot of places. But you must indulge me because the common sense has taken a completely different line. And so I'm going to start this question by running through what we think of as the list of achievements of the DA under your tenureship. So obviously, we can start off with the most important one, which, as a political party who contests elections, is that your primary opponent in an election in which you were the leader dropped 17%, more than they've lost in all of the other elections they've contested combined, and lost their national majority, which then allowed for you to, as you've laid out, enter the government, which has been a psychological watershed moment, as certainly as in my view as a pollster, there has been a marked shift in the numbers that come back post the election. In fact, the DA to date now is polling the highest it ever has. And in our latest poll at the Social Research Foundation Common Sense, it was within a few points of the ANC on a national level. But if you drill down deeper into the numbers there, you find that within the three productive provinces of South Africa, so KwaZulu-Natal, Gauteng, and the Western Cape, which makes up about 2/3 of South Africa's GDP, in fact, you have more support across those three provinces than any other party. Now, you're not the single biggest party in KwaZulu-Natal now, but you are polling
Yet.
ahead of the ANC. Yes, but you but you are polling ahead, quite far ahead of the ANC in Gauteng, and you're polling very decently in KwaZulu, and still doing remarkably well in the Western Cape. And across many different voter demographics, as you've mentioned, you have made inroads. In fact, I've watched your percentage of Black support go from about 5% of all Black voters saying that they intend to vote for you to now about 15%, which is a tripling of the amount of Black support that you currently have. Your party has also been somewhat, there's various debates that rage mainly on Twitter, but across different places about the DA's effectiveness in government. But from what we can see, given your relative position against a party that has little less than double your vote share, you've managed to achieve quite a few things. So the first and primary achievement is your stand on VAT, which had the impact of changing the balance of power within the GNU. It felt like, from the time that the GNU was put together to the time the fight over VAT started, there was the sense that maybe the ANC could just kind of walk over you guys. But then the fight over VAT showed that no, you're a serious about your principles, and you're willing to take stands, and and when you took a stand, you also saw the amount of support that came out on your side, and it pressured the ANC eventually off of the VAT increase. The another significant achievement is that under your co-governance of South Africa, South Africa has been removed from the grey list, which is a significant the significant benefit of South Africa's private industry. The currency has strengthened remarkably. We're now trading at 16 rand to the dollar, and there's other macroeconomic factors, but one of the things that does play into that is the governance structures in a country. Um, the bond market has been incredibly strong. The stock market last year was a star performer. You've had 4 consecutive quarters of growth. The growth this year is forecast to be 50% higher than it was last year. Um, and the supporters of the ANC and DA, every time we poll, are strongly supportive of the GNU, and more specifically, they are most supportive of the DA's role inside of the GNU. To keep it going on that, the inflation has come way off, and you've had this remarkable achievement of now setting the inflation target to 3%, which is in and of itself an achievement that should, that kudos should be given to the DA for its work on that. And then finally, the what I think could be cast as the single most important stand that you've taken is you have proposed an alternative to BEE that was put forth by your head of policy, Matt Cuthbert, and was argued very strongly and forcibly against him. And by doing that, you have created some ideological clarity and separation that maybe you were lacking before. And so, taken all together, this is a pretty long list of achievements, all of which happened under your leadership, and yet you're under siege. The media broadly says that you're unfit to be the leader of the party. Within the party, there seems to be some pressure mounting against you. There's some donors that seem to be unhappy with your performance for whatever reason. So, how do you explain that dynamic? What is going on there, and why is it going on? Because to us, who we try to focus on, the reality and not the sideshows, this seems to be the hard reality seems to be that every indicator shows that under your leadership, the DA has strengthened.
Well, I wish you'd invite that insufferable geriatric Peter Bruce onto your show and read that list to him. I think it would give him heart palpitations. But just to say that, look, I mean, the media have never been on my side. Never, they've never really been on any DA leader's side, and the DA leader always gets a disproportionate share of criticism from the media to anybody else, and there's always a higher standard to which we're held, and I welcome that. I would, however, say that with leadership comes the burden of leadership, and leadership is about making decisions. It's about appointing and disappointing people. And there's an unspoken law that we talk about in politics called the law of diminishing Christmas cards. And it works that the longer you're in leadership, the less Christmas cards you receive, because sometimes you have to be able to tell people no within your organization. Sometimes you have to stand up against people in your organization, and sometimes you have to remove them. And pretty soon, a coalition of the aggrieved starts to develop, and they then obviously start to get restless. I would also point out the media have not backed me in a single one of the 3 congresses that I won overwhelmingly and convincingly. And I've had an opponent in every single one of the conferences and congresses that I've faced. And in every single one of those, the media have consistently backed the other candidate. But the people of the DA, our councillors, our activists, our hard workers on the ground, know that I've been a leader that's walked alongside them and been in the trenches with them. I'm on the ground, I get out there, and I never ask anybody on the ground to do anything I'm not prepared to do as a leader. And I've demonstrated leadership. I'm amazed that, Peter Bruce rattles off all these personalities who he feels could be better leaders of the DA without any thought about how they got into the positions they are, where they've been able to demonstrate their incredible talent and ability. I'd look at the Cape Town mayor, for instance. Very early on in my leadership, I had to realize that I had to make a tough decision. Cape Town was not in a good space, and it needed a refresh. And it was a controversial decision to replace a colored mayor with a young white candidate who was also a good friend and close friend of mine, and that is Jordan Hill-Lewis. And he's been transformational in that job precisely because the function of leadership was to look ahead and see who would be able to do the job and take it to the next level. And I don't think there's nearly enough credit given to these things because they don't happen by osmosis. And in doing that decision, of course, I made some enemies as well on people who are on the other side of the argument. And as you make these leadership decisions, there are people that get irritated and unhappy with the decision. And it's a function of leadership. And that's why as Tony Blair, I think it was, who famously said, every political career ends in tears, because eventually, you as a leader made so many of these tough calls that eventually the coalition of the aggrieved gets so large that they move against you. But as in the case of Tony Blair, I think people should be careful what they wish for, because when that leader's gone, you may not necessarily get what you thought you were getting at the end of it. And so, be careful what you wish for in politics. It just might come true.
You know, I want to ask you this though. Why is it that we at the Common Sense are able to put together, this list, which isn't, it actually doesn't have anything, what we're talking about here doesn't actually have anything to do with you as a person, but it just has to do with what has happened, right? It's not, there's no debating these facts. There's no debating that the stock market took off. There's no debating that the bond market has been good. There's no debating that growth is forecast to be higher. There's no debate about them. They just happened. So like why why can we put this list together, but your own political party doesn't seem to be capable of doing the same kind of clinical read and putting forward of here are the facts of what's going on in it, regardless of who's tenure, just what has happened in the last few years as DA achievements, because they are happened under your leadership, but they're achievements of the party.
Yeah, it is frustrating, and I suppose it takes a crisis to reveal who your real allies are in the party. And it's not when the good times are rolling, but when the tough times roll around, that you realize that not everybody on your side is cheering you on, and that some people within political parties obviously have an interest in being able to drive divisions and the like. And I've always said very clearly that a political party that talks to itself and about itself continuously is not talking to voters. And that's why we should focus like a laser beam on all these things you're precisely talking about, rather than having endless commissions to investigate spurious claims. I would also say that what is forgotten is what I inherited. I inherited a party in 2019 where the leader had walked off the job, trashed the party on the way out, taken some of its leaders with him, trampled over the flag, and according to News 24 at the time, it was the death of the DA. Well, here we are, 2024, after 3 terms now of my leadership, one as interim and 2 now as fully fledged leaders, a party that everyone talks about. Nobody talks about the future of South Africa without talking about the DA. We're a party of national government. We're delivering. We're winning in more places. Our by-election results are growing. Our polling, for the first time, has us neck and neck with the ANC. And I think people forget these things in perhaps the hurly-burly of daily life, but that is the legacy that I will be leaving when my time as leader comes to an end. I stepped up at the time, but nobody else wanted to take the DA forward. It was what they in Afrikaans call a vrotboedel, and we determinedly turned it round. And now the DA is where it is today, where nobody, as I said, talks about the future without having the DA on their lips.
And I think it's a very interesting kind of echo of history as I'm sitting here, because obviously you and I have had a podcast before, not for the Common Sense, but as Gabe Makin podcast, my original personality.
Manifestation.
Exactly. And but when I remember that podcast so well, and I'm thinking about it now because during that podcast there was the whole roadkill debacle, and I had this like the same kind of sense of frustration that one has now, which is, you know, it doesn't matter, the personal disputes between party members and members of the same organization, those break out all the time, and that's a sideshow, it's a circus. It doesn't matter. You guys are in the position now in government, and so what matters more than those things is what you are actually doing in government. We don't no, I don't go and say I'm not going to hire this plumber because he, uses offensive words to refer to women. He's a great plumber, so I'm gonna hire him. We're not. It seems to be that politicians are held to this weird standard where you judge them more on their kind of personal lives than on what they actually do in the roles that they're given.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's it. And you want to be judged by these. And also, yeah, I would also say that leaders are not infallible. We're also human beings. And just like anybody else, we make mistakes. We, perhaps don't, could have done things better in certain instances. But I mean, I think when you look at a political leader, you need to look at the entire spectrum of leadership and not just pinpoint one thing out of it and say, well, because you said this or you said that you're a terrible leader. We're humans, and if we don't want humans in leadership, well, then we better start, handing government over to AI and automatons, because we're human. And I'm the first to admit I'm a human. I'm subject to the same human frailties as every other citizen in the country, and I make mistakes. I mess up. I'd like to think I get it right more often than I get it wrong, and where I get it wrong, I like to take accountability for it, and which I've done in every instance where perhaps I haven't done as well as I would have liked to. And I think that's how you judge somebody. But to crucify somebody for a single comment or a flyaway moment over a course of a 30-year career, I think is a little bit unfair. I think you got to look at the track record of where that person has served, the decisions they've made, and most importantly, what the outcomes of those decisions have been. And as I say, I like to think I've got it right many, many more times than I've got it wrong.
Yeah, and I think we can agree on that, given that the kind of spirited defense I made of your record. Um, but I do want to take you through one of the chief charges that against you that is more about kind of your position as the leader, and that chief charge against you is essentially that since you've gotten into the GNU, you've been an appeaser. Some people will go, on the right wing Twitter might go as far as to say you've been captured by the ANC. So where do you think that comes from, and how do you respond to the charge that all you're doing is just kind of being a doormat for the ANC to walk over?
Well, I think it's lazy analysis, and I think it's not borne out by the actual facts on the ground. And you mentioned earlier the VAT fight. That was a very clear example where we said we're not going to be a doormat to the ANC, and we're not just here to rubber stamp what they want done. And we were prepared to walk away from the GNU uh, on the basis if that VAT increase had gone through. And we were very clear about that. And we followed it through. It wasn't an idle threat. We voted against the VAT increase in that first budget sitting. And obviously, we have to deal with the consequences thereafter. But it very clearly showed early on that we're not prepared to be walked all over. We've not sold out on things like BEE. In fact, under my leadership, and since the GNU was formed, the biggest broadside against BEE in its current form has been fired in terms of our alternative that has been put there. Not acquiescing to the ANC's view of the economy as well. The medium-term development plan has very key elements of the DA's policy platform. But yes, there are some times in any coalition where you have to make compromises. The reality is the DA didn't get 51% of the vote, neither did the ANC. But that doesn't mean that the party that got the most out of the below 51% gets to call all the shots. And that's been some of the muscle memory the ANC have had to unlearn, is that they don't have a majority anymore. And getting things through requires compromise. And I certainly think the way in which the medium-term development plan, the medium-term budget policy statement, there's now been a very clear change in heart, and there's been a lot more collaborative and the like. The next big battle that we're fighting is on foreign policy, because unfortunately, the ANC seem to think they still have a sole mandate on foreign policy. They do not. We have a new government, and the foreign policy of this country must reflect that new government's views and opinions, and not just the views and opinions of one party, and particularly when the views and opinions of those one party have got us into the state that we are, with allies such as the United States and others. It is 30 years of bad policy choices, 30 years of poking a stick in the eye of your trading partners. And, Ernest Hemingway said, how do you go bankrupt? And it's slowly and then very quickly.
Mm,
Our relationship with places like the US, for instance, has deteriorated with a variety of different acts by this government, the way we've been on the wrong side of debates in the international arena, the way in which we've poked a stick in the eye over the Lady R matter. These are all choices that have been made that have put our relationships with other countries in peril. And if we're going to fix it, it's going to require a reconfiguration and realignment about where we sit in the world and the like. And that cannot be the ANC's worldview. It has to be the worldview of the GNU as a whole. And that is why we are pushing so hard now for there to be, like we had with the economic differences, a sit down together and decide what is the national interest and how is that national interest best served. The founding document of the GNU, the Statement of Intent, clearly says that our approach to foreign policy will be as non-aligned. Well, if we want to be non-aligned, what does that mean? And what does non-alignment look like? And I don't think that we have that understanding yet.
yeah, and I want to get more into this question on around foreign policy, but before I do that, I would like to add to your point you made about the biggest broadside against BEE. You know that you know we at the Common Sense welcomed and actually celebrated the DA alternative policy, and we polled exactly the question around support for that policy. And now, to kind of preface that, in almost every poll we've done around BEE, there's about 80% of people who think uh, that appointment, civil service appointment, government procurement should be done on the basis of merit and not on race. And now we ask the question around your BEE policy, and we get a similar, not as much as 80% of people, but uh, close enough to say that what your policy has done has captured this anti-BE sentiment in the country and has presented an alternative that the vast majority of South Africans can actually believe in, which, another achievement that is wholly ignored.
Yeah. But also, I mean, it's a no-brainer, really. And if you speak to any serious economist, they will tell you exactly the same. You measure a policy on its outcomes, not its objectives. And under triple B double E, as the ANC designed it, black unemployment has increased, black poverty has increased, black opportunity has decreased. And so, as a policy, against all its measurements, it has not achieved its objectives. Now, you don't keep sticking your finger in the plug, hoping that you won't get shocked. You're going to get shocked every time. And that is my frustration with just simply continuing down the same road. Nobody, I'm sure even at the Common Sense, um, disagrees that we have to have meaningful empowerment of people who were previously excluded from opportunity. But the way you do that has to be one that doesn't harm the economy and actually then sees people measurably moving up in all of those indices. Inequality, our Gini coefficient, has widened. It hasn't narrowed after 20-something years of BEE. So it's not dealing with inequality. It's not dealing with black exclusion. It's not promoting black ownership. And it's not seeing black South Africans being employed in bigger numbers. What we need to do is to have policies that are genuinely empowering at a grassroots level, not just of small cliques and elites. And that is why we are determined that this policy will prevail, and it is the policy that we will continue to drive. If we have to do it all the way to the 2029 election, we will do so. And if we have to convince more voters that this is the way to go, and that's why they need to make us the largest party in any government post 2029, so that we can make sure that these things finally start to take place. But just doggedly clinging to a policy that has so clearly failed does not make sense. Let's rather sit around the table and decide how we see genuine empowerment at a grassroots level that's going to then be able to really move those metrics, inequality, unemployment, and exclusion in a meaningful way.
I think at the common sense, we might make the argument that the most empowering thing that can happen for a previously excluded, whatever
Grow the
the term
economy
we
and
want
get
to
a job.
use, as person, is to find meaningful employment that allows for you to pull yourself up and slowly make your way move up the socio-economic ladder.
Correct.
And so the role of government should be to facilitate that, not to bean count and mandate exactly who should be in what position and where.
And actually implement a policy that harms the economy, doesn't help it.
Yes, and I want to stay on this theme of the GNU and economic performance, because we have at the Common Sense we've been very positive on the GNU. We think that the alliance between what we would see as the established middle class and aspirant middle class is something that allows for there to be a stable kind of center of power that brings the majority of South African interests together. But the rate of growth, even as I mentioned earlier, the rate of growth this year is going to be 50% higher than last year, but it's only 1.5%, which is not good. And it compared to our emerging market peers, it is seriously not good. And if it stays there, one of the things that we might worry about at the Common Sense is that the GNU might start to suffer from the same fate as the ANC of this kind of slow bleed that eventually pours out as like significant frustration and a significant move against it. So, two questions along this kind of idea of economic growth. What do you make of this idea that, economic growth could be a poison chalice for you in the GNU? And how do we get our economic growth in South Africa up to our emerging market peers of about a 4 to 5% year on year average?
Well, those are both great questions, and you're absolutely right, and I want to agree with your analysis. And I say it at almost every cabinet meeting, that if the GNU goes into the next election with these growth and jobs numbers, we might as well be handing the keys over to our opponents on across from us in the House, and that would be catastrophic. And so, jobs and growing the economy has to be the number one priority of the GNU, and that's why we've been so insistent on getting our feet around the table in those areas where the economy is being discussed, and getting our hands on the levers of power so that we can help to shift that. Because you're absolutely right, 1.5% is not good enough. I mean, it's better than a recession, but it's not good enough. And as you say, compared to what? Bill Clinton said that's the famous question in politics. Compared to what? Compared to our emerging market peers, as you've already said, we're not performing well in that regard. And so we have to do better. We've got to get the economy growing at least 3 to 4%. And that's just to kind of get over the break even of population growth and the like. Um, what we need to do, I think it's very clear: deregulate, get government out of the way in as many places as possible. I think the first place to start is by breaking the monopoly on energy in the country. That would be the obvious place to start. You can't fuel an economy, and you can't fuel economic growth without electricity. And I think that deregulation of that and liberalization of the electricity sector is essential. We've got to let go now. We've ended load shedding. We now need to move to the next obvious step, which is deregulation. I think we need to rationalize and get rid of as many state-owned enterprises as possible, either through agglomeration or through sale or through shutting them down. Doesn't make sense for the state to be running loss-making diamond companies and all sorts of things. And thirdly, focusing like a laser beam on those catalytic projects that stimulate economic growth. And that's not always in a social spend, it's on infrastructure. Roads, rail, ports are the arteries of any economy. And when those get clogged through lack of maintenance or from just disrepair, you clog the arteries of the economy. And it's impossible then, even with the best will in the world, to ensure that you can move goods and services, you can attract investment, you can ensure there's a stable electricity supply, you can ensure there's a water supply. So those three key things are essential, and all of them actually involve government letting go of its command and control of everything. Of course, there are some areas where government has to remain in control. Regulation of some of the imports of health products to protect citizens and for the greater good. But there are other areas where government just needs to let go and let the private sector fill the space. Look at how the private generation of electricity has ended load shedding in South Africa. And just that small bit of liberalization has been catalytic. And we now need to go the whole hog. And it speaks to all of those things. And that's how we will create jobs, because when you get rid of the regulation, you get rid of the red tape, and government focuses on the few things it must do and do them well, such as infrastructure growth and development, and putting aside enough infrastructure for future growth. That's how you encourage business. That's how you stimulate the private sector, and that's how you get it on. It's not good enough that we have one of the best agricultural productions in the world, but our apples and pears sit at the quayside for way too long before they get to market. That's not stimulating confidence and growth in those sectors. And so I've seen in the agriculture space alone, our deciduous fruit producers, apples and pears, and like, say that they can, in the short to medium term, quadruple their production, provided they have the certainty that they'll be able to get their products to market. Now, think about that. For every 1 hectare of apples or pears, it's 1.5 jobs created. Now, imagine if we were able to, just in the deciduous fruit and the citrus sector, quadruple what we're producing. Imagine the jobs and the economic growth. And that's just one sector of the economy. That's not even taking into account manufacturing or any other. But it's not good enough that we're sitting at 300 and something in the port efficiency index, because we're clinging desperately to control of those ports. Open them up. Our peer countries have all done public-private partnerships on their ports. Either sell off or state ownership and private ownership, but it has brought the efficiencies that we need to really get moving forward.
Yeah, so I'm going to transition us back into this discussion that you kind of prefaced on foreign policy, because it's tied in with our discussion here on the economy. Because one of the things that we make in that lines of the common sense that we talk about here is that the foreign direct investment into South Africa is just too low, and it's one of those key indicators that you need to improve in order to sustain higher growth levels. And one of the things that has been incredibly harmful to the foreign direct investment and maybe the incentive for the biggest economy in the world to invest in us is the very oppositional stance, long-term oppositional stance that has been taken by the ANC towards America. But before I ask you about what our approach to America should be, you were in the room in that famous meeting with between President Ramaphosa and President Trump. And so, what was it like to be
That
in
was
that
quite a meeting.
room? Yes. What was it like to be in that room, and what was it like to see and meet President Trump? And did you get the sense that the Americans are open to a broader trade and investment deal with South Africa, to try and to provide some of this foreign direct investment we're talking about here?
Mm. Yeah, well, I mean, that was, as I said, a very interesting meeting, and very interesting, and obviously a huge honor to be able to get into the Oval Office, which I must tell you is a lot smaller in real life than it looks on TV. And certainly meeting someone like Donald Trump, who, whether you agree or disagree with him, has certainly been a transformational figure in American politics. The Oval Office is kind of the center of the political universe internationally. And when one considers who has sat in that office before, there's obviously a sense of the weight of history on you when you're in a room like that. I think we came out of that meeting better than we went in. But it was very clear from that meeting that we've got perception problems around South Africa. And there are also, as I said, some areas that go beyond perception and have been deliberate acts of omission and commission in our relationship with the United States that has caused anger. And what I think you've had over the course of the last number of years is two rivers running consecutively together. You've had the rise of the MAGA movement in the US, and in South Africa, this antagonism towards the West and suspicion to the West, and obviously long ties from the Cold War days to America's opponents. And I think the Trump election saw a confluence of those two things, and that's where we're seeing the turmoil that's taking place there now. And it's turmoil we have to navigate. We can't just simply say we'll have nothing to do with the United States. We need to have a partnership with the United States. I think that if you look at South Africa's constitution and our Bill of Rights, there's a good values alignment between the two countries. And I think it's in the US's interest as well to have a good relationship with South Africa. We are the largest economy on the continent. We're the most industrialized economy on the continent. And I think it would be wrong for America not to have a footprint or a relationship with South Africa, given our strategic importance on the continent, and just as much as it's important for us to have a relationship with the US. So I think that there needs to be some greater efforts made to mend those relationships. For goodness sake, let's appoint an ambassador at the least. I mean, what message are we sending to the US that we don't have an ambassador in Washington to talk to people? I mean, I've sent an agricultural attaché when I saw things getting rocky. I sent one of my top plant scientists to Washington so that we could deal with the agri stuff. I think we need to get a serious person in Washington. I think that Alistair Peters, for instance, has done incredible work already to date behind the scenes. Why not appoint him as the ambassador and let him work with the full strength of tools that are available there to be able to get it done? These are the questions that we have to ask, because what message are we sending by not even having an appointed ambassador there now? We've got an ambassador from the US, and whether you agree with him or you don't agree with him, he is the representative of the US government. He'll be coming to South Africa, and we need to engage with him. We need to deal with the perception problems that exist about South Africa, but we also then need to deal with remedying some of the mistakes we've made in the past. And I said, Lady R is one of them, the way we voted in some of the United Nations votes, the positioning we've taken on conflicts around the world. These have all caused great annoyance to our, well, who what should be our natural allies in the US. These were people who were very good allies to us in the fight against apartheid. And there's no reason for us to be at loggerheads with them, and we should be finding ways. Look, we're not going to agree on everything. I think we accept that there's not everything we're going to agree on. We don't agree with everything the US does, and neither should we. But I think if we're going to say we're non-aligned, we need to be genuinely non-aligned then. And the alignment then needs to take place around values rather than around opportunistic positioning on various things.
Yeah, well, let's continue this theme of being non-aligned, because before your trip to Washington, you also went on a trip to China, which I think was quite successful. And what was it? What was that like? And tying into this, what should the approach to China be in South Africa?
Well, I think it's like any approach to any country. If you're genuinely non-aligned, you look at the situation and say, how can I benefit from this particular relationship? And what can we do to foster a relationship that ensures we can continue to benefit? China is a huge opportunity. I've now traveled to China 3 times. I've also been to other parts of the world. But China is a huge opportunity for us, particularly for agriculture goods. We produce at scale excellent quality goods, and there's a demand for them in China. And we've been very successful in signing trade deals that benefit South African farmers and South African agriculture. And we must continue to do that. But being non-aligned means you can deal with China, but it doesn't mean you don't deal with the US or you don't deal with Europe. I think it's not an either or, it's an and. We'll deal with China and we'll deal with the US. I think that a very good example of non-alignment is Narendra Modi's India. They're able to navigate a variety of different environments, and they look at any foreign conflict or foreign discussion not on, well, how's this going to help my allies, and will this please people who helped me 40 years ago. They say, what's in India's best interest? And that's why Modi's able to navigate the White House. He can come to BRICS. He doesn't put his arm around Putin and say he's my best friend ever, but he's got a presence in BRICS. He's got a presence in IBSA, and he's able to navigate all of these relationships because he has adopted a genuinely non-aligned approach.
So I'm quite conscious of time as we're running here. So I'm going to move us on, and hopefully I can ask your to just quickly answer the last few questions um on you, and then I will go briefly onto foot and mouth, and then we can wrap it from there. So the first question, it's a bit of a jarring transition, but we'll smooth it over. Um, so what is your approach from now? Is the intention to stay as leader of the DA and to fight the next leadership election?
Well, obviously, there comes a time in your leadership where you have to assess whether it's time to come or time to go. I obviously will make an announcement about that in due course. But I would say that I think it would be very dangerous for any party to allow leaders to be politically assassinated um, in the way in which some have attempted to do, and to then reward that behavior. Because what it'll then do is that every single contest in your party then becomes, well, who can assassinate their competition further. Obviously, our nomination date is the 24th of February. Our general approach in the party is we don't make pronouncements until then. But I'm very confident, having looked at the numbers, that I would be able to win a contest against any potential challenger in the DA. And I, am fully prepared to do so. Um, and obviously, I will make an announcement in due course. But I think I've got a great track record. I think I picked the party up when it was at its lowest. I think we've done a lot of things together. I think there's a lot more the DA needs to do. And certainly my job in politics is long, long from finished. And there's a number of things I intend to finish before I wave my goodbyes.
Briefly, if assuming that you stay as leader of the DA post the election, should we expect you to stay the DA to be stay as a productive member of the government of national unity?
Well, I think that's what our voters want. If you look at any of the polling, that's certainly what our voters are saying. I'm sure they don't want to be thrown to the wolves of the opposition, MK and the EFF. It's frightening to see them in Parliament and to see what they're capable of. It would be frightening to see them with their hands on the levers of power. But that would ultimately be a decision not for the leader, but for the party. And I would certainly, as leader, continue to advise the DA to be very careful about just simply walking away from the government of national unity. Um, I think that while there may be some short-term relief among some of the more virulent anti-GNU people, that would pretty soon be replaced and by an anger at being abandoned to the forces of the radical left, who will no doubt make hay while the sun shines. So if I was a leader and I was cautioning my FedEx and my federal council, I would certainly be saying, look, we've in the GNU, we've got to make it work. Coalitions are the way of the future. There's going to be a lot more coalitions after the local government elections later this year. We have to demonstrate that we are adults and that we are able to work with others. But when we leave the GNU, it must be on a matter of great principle and a matter which voters can understand. Otherwise, it will never be forgotten. So I'm committed to the GNU. I got the party into this. I'm the first leader of the party to lead the party into national government. I'm committed to the GNU, but not at all costs. And should there reach a situation where there's principled decisions that are violated, the constitution that's violated, and decisions on the economy are not aligned with us, we would obviously have to reconsider. But I think the GNU is working a lot better than it did when it started, and I think there's been a settling in. I think there's a greater maturity that has started to appear, a lot less brinkmanship on both sides, and a genuine effort to really find each other. And I would really want to see the party continuing with that, particularly to demonstrate that at a local government level as well, that we are reliable coalition partners and responsible coalition partners, and that our eye is on the one thing that matters all the time, and that is, are we making sure that we're doing right by South Africa and its people? And I think that we have been. I don't think we've reached a stage yet where there's been an existential crisis that the DA should leave. We were prepared to leave on VAT. That was a big principal decision. But I think that we owe it to South Africa to give this its very best shot. And that if we walk away, it should not be for a churlish reason, because neither the voters or history will be kind to us.
Yeah, so I think that that will conclude my leadership, my leader of the DA section, and I want to just, as briefly as we could make it, it does feel a bit wrong to do this to something that is as serious as what is happening with foot and mouth disease. But one of the things that has landed in your lap as a Minister of Agriculture is foot and mouth disease and massive outbreaks across the country. And we at the Common Sense have been covering the story a little bit for the last few weeks, and one of the things that we did uncover was that the seriousness of the problem was known about, and was reported on by the your predecessor in as early as 2022. And yet it seemed as though there was a reluctance at that moment to start to source some of the vaccines that were needed to deal with the foot and mouth disease disaster, because it would have put South Africa's foot and mouth free status in jeopardy. And so the kind of expedient decision was taken that rather than procure these vaccines, we're going to, just let things play out. But now it's been now you are the minister and you're having to deal with the problem. Um, so, can you just take us through,
Sure.
the kind of problem that's happened, and how you are going about trying to solve it?
Well, I think it's first of all important to say that South Africa lost its foot and mouth disease-free status in 2019.
Mm.
Um, we lost that largely as a result of a failure to control the red zones and Limpopo, and we've seen outbreaks since then, and we've had outbreaks of foot and mouth disease in virtually every single year since 2019. And the approach of the department has always been to follow FMD. So where it breaks out, you go and deal with it. And obviously, when I came into office, and having looked very carefully and making biosecurity one of my priorities, looked very carefully at the risks that were involved, and that this strategy has not worked. We've done the same thing now for 20 years, and it hasn't worked. And yes, we can draw lines on maps and offices, and we can declare disease management areas, but if on the ground animals are still being moved and we're still seeing the outbreaks every year with devastating consequences, surely we've got to do something different. So what I did as minister is I convened a bosberaad. I brought together for the very first time in South Africa's history private vets, the private sector, farming organizations, industry bodies that represent the various industries in the red meat sector, together with the state under one roof to discuss a way forward. At the conclusion of that bosberaad, a ministerial task team was created, and I insisted it must be 50% private sector and 50% state, because without the public-private partnership, that is what's been lacking, I think, in the strategy to date. After that, the ministerial task team looked at the epidemiology, they looked at the science, they looked at what international examples of getting on top of FMD looked like, and they came to me with this plan that we should vaccinate the entire national herd. Now, it's the first time that such a large-scale vaccination has been embarked upon, and we vaccinated over 2 million animals to date. Once that policy was announced, we've rolled out 2 million of the BVR vaccine. And obviously, we were continuing to roll out vaccine, and then we ran into the issue that Botswana had to close over December for a mandatory cleaning operation that's required by law. And it then made it very clear that a reliance on a single vaccine provider is not good enough. And so what the focus has now been on is on deepening and widening the pool of vaccine producers and encouraging the private sector on board. So we've issued licenses now for JuneVax to import the Dolvet vaccine, which we will then procure from them for rollout. And we're bringing on board other local agents who represent international vaccine companies. And the idea is to have as many vaccine companies as possible providing vaccines so that we can roll them out. Thirdly, I've created a ministerial implementation and monitoring team made up of the private sector, the industry bodies that represent the red meat chain, the RMIS, the RPO, the Milk Producers Association, the Pork Association, as well as farmers' organizations, TLU, Agri-SA, and AFASA, who have now come aboard so that they can help get the communications down to farmer level about what's being done. I'm confident now that this is the right strategy to go for. It is a 10-year strategy, but it's not going to take 10 years to deal with the current crisis. And I think that's important to say. The 10-year is an endpoint. It's a similar road that Brazil and Argentina walked, who also were suffering from endemic, excuse me, I don't have foot and mouth, I can assure you. Um, the that Botswana and Argentina used to become FMD free, and the strategy is divided into 3 distinct phases. The first is obviously the immediate one, and that's to get on top of FMD, and we've chosen to do that by vaccination. And I've set the target that by the end of this year, we would have vaccinated over 80% of the national herd. It's around 14 million animals in the national herd. So you can understand why it is important that we have a lake of vaccines from different suppliers so we can vaccinate at scale. And we're not beholden to a single one. That we will reduce the incidence of foot and mouth by 70% in this 12-month period. We will then move into the phase of applying to the World Organization of Animal Health for FMD-free status with vaccination. What that will do is open up markets that are currently closed to us for sale of red meat products. There are many countries that accept that status and accept meat under those terms. Once that takes place, we'll compartmentalize the country and then start to keep the FMD again through prophylactic vaccination along the red zones where it'll always be endemic because it is endemic in Buffalo, Kruger Park, Mpumalanga, Limpopo, KwaZulu-Natal, to prophylactically continue vaccinating there and stop vaccinating in the rest of the country. What that will then enable us to do is to apply to WOHA for the FMD-free status without vaccination. And that means everything is open to us in the world for our red meat sector in the country. So there's an immediate strategy to get on top of the current outbreak. There's a medium-term plan to open up markets again for us through vaccination. And there's a longer-term plan to make sure we're FMD free. Now, it took Brazil 21 years. I reckon we can do it in 8 to 10 because our herd is obviously a lot smaller. But it is going to require the government and the private sector working hand in hand together, which is precisely why at every step of the way, I've brought the private sector along with us, from the Bosberaad to the task team, to the implementation and monitoring team, and now with vaccine procurement. The private sector has been a partner with government, and we will continue to partner with them because the rollout stage is also going to require that. If we do that, we will, and we stick to this plan. The first time in 30 years, the country has a plan to deal with FMD with measurable objectives. I believe that we can get on top of this once and for all. And that would then mean a whole new horizon for our red meat producers in South Africa, because then we have access to the world with our excellent priced, excellent quality meat.
Well, I can only wish you luck in the handling of this disease, and I must say that we at the Common Sense do applaud your efforts to try and bring South Africa's incredible private sector in as a partner to help you when dealing with this, because the agricultural industry in South Africa is one of those case studies that show that without any sort of government interference, South Africans can build the most incredible industries.
Yeah, without a doubt, we have an incredible private sector in South Africa. And what Operation Vulindlela has shown us very clearly is that when you unleash that power in partnership with government, that we can do incredible things and achieve the impossible. Who would have thought that we would have ended load shedding? Who would have thought that you could order a ID document or passport through your local bank, and pretty soon from your banking app. All of that is thanks to partnerships with government and the private sector. And the more that we can collaborate, the stronger it makes our response, whether it's FMD, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's electricity, whether it's government processes. Don't crowd out the private sector. Crowd them in, bring them in, make them part of the solution, and allow them to help you achieve what you want to achieve. Let go this clunking fist of state, and let's open up and allow private sector partners to help us, because they are there, they're willing, and they have demonstrated through Operation Vulindlela that they can make a catalytic difference in what we do.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me today, John. It was an
Great
incredible
pleasure.
conversation.
Thank you.
I've been Gabriel Makin, and this has been Talking Sense.